So now I'm gonna go and change gears a little bit. And this is gonna require a lot of prefacing. So for the next hour and a half, I've prepared something that helps educate myself and also talk about how I learn from discussions. Okay, so yesterday we had a guest, and it's safe to say that I initially thought this guest was open-minded, which still may be the case. However, for myself, there were some points that I wanted to alleviate. So 21 days to me is pretty insignificant for myself. So this will come into play later. However, I do have observational skills, which will be played in later, right? And regrettably, observations do not become skills until you have time to process. So now that I have time to process, we'll talk about God equals want. No, that's not, you weren't here. God was introduced with want, and God is the first time I've seen that particle that replaces another particle, as I have mentioned earlier. So please, like, this is English and Japanese, not just Japanese. So try not to we'll go into that a little bit maybe. So anyways, so this particular discussion came with the idea of what I had problems with was this whole feeling of as a matter of fact, which is very relevant to people who hang out quite a lot. As a matter of fact. And the idea is a matter of fact involves assumptions. And we're not going to another discussion, but assumptions do not equal presumptions. Presumptions takes on a very different type of form of language. And sure enough, it's already confirmed to me that our guests explicitly said they're not American. Sure, that's fine. Our guest also suggests that they understand English, which is because we use that, and I think they have a really excellent command of English, but not American. That's not enough information to determine if they're British, like British English. Perhaps, maybe that's what they're suggesting, or that they're just non-English speaking. As in, that's not their primary language. Whatever it is, there's not enough information. But what it does tell me is that this person, I must be tolerant of this person's perhaps understanding of what I'm referring to. And when this as a matter of fact happened, which is equal assumption, presumption, we've had previous ones. Let's do a little take back to the greatest hits. I remember at day 8, someone said, I have a stick up my butt, with 3 T's, obviously, inside joke. 3 T's for the classic inside joke. I have a stick up my butt because I said I don't know enough yet. And then I told this person to wait and stop saying things I observed. Right? So here's the difference between, again, going to observations. When you're observing something, you are discovering, and then you're trying to make sense of it. Okay? That is very different from knowing something and being able to explain it yet. right? So apparently somehow during day 8, this person suggested that, oh, I'm implying that by day 8, I'm a master of Japanese. There's a difference between stating the obvious and removing the discovery process and a master of Japanese, which to this day, it'll come back because this person did the same counter argument by stating the day. Somehow like that matters to me. Of course, if I gave that person the impression, I'm sorry. The reason I count days is for record keeping. I count how many I journal. So I write and record everything I do each day. So this 21 days is not just a slight digression. It's not a measure of credibility. Contrary to how these two people, and I totally misspelled credibility, but that's okay. Contrary to these two people's mindsets, no matter how long you do something, it does not give you credibility, in my opinion. So there's no reason, like, I might have misrepresented myself. And perhaps in the future, I'll explicitly say why I'm counting days. Counting days do not give someone credibility, in my opinion. Respectfully. A lot of other people on YouTube, right, on the internet space, the quickest and most efficient way of determining credibility is to just simply state how long you've been doing something. Fair enough. I can assure you from an intellectual standpoint that if you did something for 100 days, you did something for 200 days, when it gets to a certain extent of days, the variation is so great that is the richness of doing something a very long time. When someone does something for 600 days, that person is likely to become a master of a specific nuance of something. They're not all mastering. They have refined, gone through the iteration process. So when two masters talk to each other, they have a lot of interesting things to talk to each other. Okay? So outside of that realm, 21 days and 8 days, still trivial. And even then, I would not use days as a form of credibility. But on the internet, you got to make it fast, right? How do you give yourself credibility? Outside of this little slight digression, give a title. And then this meets into our second dude. All these people are connected, and they're going to be forever connected in my memory because I'm building the glossary of my experiences. So, which then we met at day, I think it was day 18. We met the person that did exactly this, which is how the story connects. Day 8 connects with day 18, possibly. It might be 17. Again, the day is a little bit more for record keeping. So this person used their title that they gave themselves as a form of credibility. Okay? So they called themselves a linguist. And obviously I made a video about the complacency of becoming a specialist, especially self-labeling yourself. Usually people call you something, not you give yourself something. And guess what? That's a great lesson in Japanese honorifics. I mean, if this person really does enjoy linguistics and they are delved into the Japanese culture through the language, which they didn't, which is my criticism. They told me, as a linguist, it is not important. At least they gave me the impression that it is not important to consider the mindset of the cultural language, like the culture behind the language. So what I mean by this is, in this middle of my digression, another digression, which I might have somewhere in the previous days, around day 18, I went at length about how understanding the cultural mindset through learning the language can propel someone to help people learn, right? How to embrace something that the language has to maybe temper your expectations and raising the baseline, understanding where the baseline of languages are and what the acceptance and tolerance rate of each language. That way you can form a sentimental connection. Obviously, pragmatically speaking, I made the concession that if this person is a linguist, they're probably focusing on the mechanics of language, and that's perfectly reasonable. To tell someone who's at day 18, I suppose, that it doesn't matter what I say, I think it has something to do with the fact that I am a beginner at Japanese. I'm not a beginner at learning. Hands down, not. So it struck to me as this person, self-proclaimed linguist, and I differ in our perception of what is the learning process and what is necessary for the learning process. And that's perfectly fine. However, it is important to note that that person suggested that it is not important to understand the cultural baseline for acquiring a language. Fair enough. As a linguist, I guess it's not important to them. They specialize somewhere else. Certainly. Which we did get a throwback. In 2 days, I think it was day 20, around day 20, it might be day 19 actually, and this might be 17. I might be off by a day. But in day 19, this person decided to, I suppose, bless me with their presence again, because I wasn't expecting to see this person again. Someone who flings around titles and periods and credibilities. I'm like oil and water combination to the person. I know there's this whole idea of the imposter syndrome, right? This imposter syndrome. And you have the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Or the Kruger-Dunning effect. So oftentimes in a highly educated environment, at least for myself, I want to remove this. And it's a habit of mine. Call it a bias. It does diminish the hard work and perhaps the legacy one has. But generally speaking, I like to remove the environment that status, so title and length, right? Like how many years or days. I want to remove that barrier so that everyone that I speak to, we're on even intellectual ground. The idea is to exchange opinions and discussions in order to enrich the cumulative collection of experience, not to negate and downplay and condescend other people's point of view. So effectively, this self-proclaimed linguist, in my opinion, respectfully, does not work professionally. In order to provide advice, and your advice is that the thing you're talking about is not important, it's not establishing rapport. So I'm naturally inclined to say that this person is a hobbyist who likes to learn a lot of language but hasn't been in a professional capacity. I might be entirely way off the mark, and this person works for a company or a teaching thing that respects the way this person treats other people's opinions. It can work. Elon Musk happened, you know? So if you're really big a powerhouse, that's great. The question is, if you were a really big powerhouse, come into someone who barely talks to anyone and talks to themselves for legacy building, that's a little bit low-hanging fruit. So there are a lot of other converging evidence that would suggest that this person does not work in a professional capacity. Anyways, so this person blessed me 2 days later and decided to correct Duolingo. I was drawing the kanji. For Kyoto, and just the toe, right? Just the toe. Right? Let's review what that looks like. Whoops. My first stroke is too big. So Kyoto, right? And when you're drawing this like B-shaped thing, Duolingo has it as 2 strokes. and I was making a commentary about my English drawing. I typically do this in one stroke, right? It reminds me of a bee, and even drawing, I would do it in one stroke. And I told myself, okay, it's 2 strokes, according to Duolingo. So this person chimed in out of nowhere. No hi, no nothing. It's usually how that goes when it comes to self-importance. They said that's because it is 1 stroke. And they use this thing that now I know about in Japanese, right? Again, Hideyoshi, you are not listening to me, but yes, it's 11 total strokes in Old Chinese, perhaps. I have no idea. I'm not learning. I have no, and then it's 10 strokes in New. Fair enough. But let's focus on here. We're specifically just talking about this thing here, all right? So 2 strokes, right? It's 2 strokes. And this person said it's because it's 1 stroke. So they corrected me, and it could have helped me. It could have helped me. I was like, oh, so it's 1 stroke. And so therefore I looked out and I'm like, it's weird. Why did Duolingo have it as 2 strokes? So I took a look. I literally did this on stream, right? So I looked and I'm like, I don't see it as 1 stroke anywhere. And this is just cursory. So for the first like 2 minutes, and then obviously then we have contention. Someone else says that's because it's 2 strokes, right? Regardless if it's 1 stroke or 2 strokes, this goes back, and we're going to loop it back to the idea that, as a matter of fact, assumptions and presumptions. And what I was about to say is they put this idea of an ellipses, right? And we just learned some ellipses yesterday in the Japanese lesson, which is the idea of choto. And when they translated it, choto as in it's interesting, or it's not really there kind of thing, with the ellipses implication. And this ellipses implication is what that person used, as in like, well, that's because it's 1. Well, that's an assumption. And I've made a whole digression video. I had a whole digression about the difference between assumption based on complacency, when you become a specialist, versus presuming something, right? As in it's likely that, and then practicing foundations, right? When you swing your title around and you swing your credibility around, it, in my opinion, lulls you into a form of complacency that allows you to abandon foundations. I do not encourage this, in my opinion. I've done this to myself before in terms of a learning process. So as a matter of fact, we're about to get to our last guess, which happened yesterday. As a matter of fact is based on assumption. When someone says the word, which this is the magic word that sprung our large discussion yesterday, they use the word just in the English language in their phrasing. And this is where the discussion starts. So we'll talk about that. And it led me to a lot of learning in Japanese. So all this is relevant to what I learned here. Not comprehensive, just long enough to spend like 3 or 4 hours to at least get closer to the thing, right? So what is this complacency? Well, it turns out that most people, like I did a little more digging in day 18, like a week ago. And sure enough, it's about 90% 2 strokes and 10%, maybe some people prefer to do it 1 stroke, and they argue that stroke order doesn't matter. That stuff, fair enough. What it demonstrates to me is this person accepts truth. So, like in the spirit of the Japanese culture, there are rules. And if I were a person who embodies these Japanese rules, I would say this person is wrong. But I'm not Japanese. I'm an English speaker who has a Chinese heritage, who's multicultural, and lives in a multicultural country. I understand even then that people act on their assumptions through years of hard work, and it still allows them to draw the kanji for Kyoto. However, if we were embodying the Japanese culture, they're wrong. It's 2 strokes. That's it. Doesn't make me any, it doesn't like make me feel any better or anything. I would love to talk to that person and their background and they can be abrasive, but fair enough. Maybe we'll bump into them every once in a while. Now we're gonna move into the next person, which happened yesterday at day 21, 3 weeks in. And it all started with one English word. In my opinion, this is from my perspective, not that other person. We clearly did not see eye to eye in most things, even emotionally. So I am just sharing how this discussion allowed me and motivate myself to educate myself in being a better communicator and understand more about Japanese. So let's go down this road. So the phrase that launched this discussion yesterday was des, and I'm gonna encourage most people to hold their comments, and whoever's joining in, this is where this huge digression is going to start, and you have to wait to the end because this is not about accuracy. It's about learning and connecting observation with explanation. So it started with the word des and its function. So far, and its function to someone who has 21 days of Duolingo. Okay, so let's erase this stuff. Usually I would bring up like a white notepad or something, and I would do a lot of large logic webs in order to gather my thoughts, because I've had a night now, an evening, to really gather my thoughts about the things that I underperformed, and then the things I can do differently in the future as a learning process. So we have des, right? And there are important conditions that will come up. The idea that I've done this for 21 days. Okay. The idea that Duolingo sucks. Okay, these are very key words. Just to a teaser. So, des, me learning 21 days. Duolingo sucks. Trying to understand. Okay, trying to understand me. Gaslighting. And false assumptions. Okay, all right. So let's start with this. The comment that this person shared that allowed me to really deep dive and motivate myself to understand quite a bit more about this topic. Not comprehensive, so let's make some disclaimers. This is not comprehensive. And now this is 21 days of, again, 21 days of Japanese. And this is coming from one evening, just one evening of, I'm going to say, research. One evening of research, right? So let's go with the phrase now. There's going to be more conditions later. So it's not about being right. So it's not about being right for the time being. It's about observing, and then explaining later. In between, it's supposed to be learning, but we kind of, like the Japanese, it's implied that when you observe, you learn something in order to explain it, right? So I clearly didn't do that yesterday. So the phrase is des. I'm gonna paraphrase. This is a paraphrase. Des is just to make sentences I hope that person was implying sentences. Polite. Okay? And I made an observation in between that didn't deal with this observation, but the first comment I made was, huh, that's interesting. Use the word just. And I said, that's an interesting Americanism. So that is an interesting Americanism. Hey Indy, you're just in time for my digression of the day. So now we have established this, right? You're here for the juicy digression part. So this is what I did all evening. So this person, right? Keep in mind, 21 days is important. Duolingo sucks. Trying to understand me, gaslighting me, and false assumptions. Those are a lot of key terms that I've linked this entire story to. And this is not to be comprehensive. From this point on, what I say about Des is not comprehensive. It is because I only have 21 days of Japanese. It's one evening of research. And it's not about being right or accurate. It's about observing, learning, and eventually being able to explain it to someone, which I have not covered because I can't explain to someone without enough experience, right? So let's keep all that in mind. And then here's how it played out, right? So this person, it was spawned. This is the root of our discussion yesterday. A lot of this is being Duolingo will lead you to presume things that actively put you on the wrong path for basic concepts. Hideyoshi, you have just done what that other person did. You have assumed what it's done for me. But I will tell you, yes and no. Yes and no. But you are a person that is very similar to this particular person. However, I really respect that you continue to be here and share your opinions on things. I disagree with you for myself because you said it will lead you. You might be using you in the informal sense like other people. I agree. This clearly did not happen here. And I will let you know. There's a difference between supplemental material and localization that make you actively incorrect. Thanks for your opinion. Again, since you're assuming what I'm about to say by sharing those comments, you are effectively doing the same thing, similar thing that this person's doing. So we'll continue to do this. I mean, I assume that you showed up. Well, I presume that there was a high chance that you were going to jump ahead of me and make some commentary on behavioralism, which I feel is very presumptuous, except for the comment before, which you're assuming. In this case, it's not that. And there is a very big difference between supplementary material and localization. Once again, the guy in day 8 that said, I have a stick up my butt, that's an observation I absolutely agree with, but you are stating the obvious. Because supplemental material and localization are two different things. Two different terminologies, two different definitions. I don't need to understand Japanese or Duolingo design to understand that. So yes, it does sound like I have a stick up my butt right now. Because you're stating something, and then you're presuming something and assuming something about me. Even before I finished saying stuff. So hold on to your thoughts. For sure, we'll come to them. Hopefully. If I don't come to them, I'm sorry. It's not comprehensive, right? So let's move along here. So this person is Des is just to make sentences polite. By the way, this person making this comment, I don't think they use Duolingo. So keep that on your cap, right? Because what you're stating is referring to me, not this person. This person didn't use Duolingo. They did not give me the impression that they use Duolingo. In fact, the phrase Duolingo sucks is coming from this person, not me. So already your 2 comments are way off the mark. Okay, so I asked this person, this is an interesting Americanism, and this person suggested that first of all, they didn't understand what I mean by Americanism. That's perfectly understandable because I didn't explain it, and that was my fault. Next time I will be a little bit more forceful about that, or direct about that. But regardless, I also then followed up with, I don't really think Des just function this way. Okay, so yes, put your last comment, Hideyoshi, about leading someone to presume things that actively put you on the wrong path for basic concepts. In fact, Duolingo caused me to question whether this person's simplification is accurate. And guess what? Let me dispel your next assumption. Again, I'm pretty sure this person did not use Duolingo. So before you go and presumably trash on something, which is what this person did as well, as like saying, oh yeah, supplementary material is not, so let me diminish what Duolingo is doing to actively say this is the wrong path for learning. Let's just shelve that for now because this is not relevant in both these topics. So this person is likely a person that did not use Duolingo. So they got this simplification elsewhere. And they did give me a hint at what they did. They said they watch and read. That's all that's implied. That the implication is that watch and read Japanese. Fair enough. We don't know what that is. It's definitely not Duolingo because they was easily dismissive of Duolingo. Much like you, Hideyoshi, you're dismissive of Duolingo. That's perfectly fine. It's acceptable. So this person has a strong aversion to Duolingo. It comes later. So I asked them like, well, I don't really think Des just functions like this, where you make the sentence polite. I mean, I agree. One of the functions is to make sentences polite. Like, I agree. That's something that Duolingo kind of doesn't even imply. This person's statement is logically false. This person's statement is logical. I'm just gonna give the person the benefit of the doubt. So throwing the word around logical is not quite it, in my opinion. Hear me out. I'll give this person the fairest shake as well. This person's statement is logical. It's not technically true. So it's logical, but not technically true. Hear me out here. Okay? This is a pretty long one because I'm going to be doing this for the next hour and a half. I don't really think Des just functions this way, right? When they say just function. It's incorrect if you drop Des. Your grammar is incorrect. Yes, Hideyoshi. That's one of the things. That doesn't mean it's not logical. Okay, alright, let's pause for a moment. If you're gonna talk about language, right? In my opinion, when you say something is logically false, it means the logic itself is false. Not whether it's accurate or not. So just saying, like, this person's logic is sound. Because it does do that. Now, technically, if this person is viewing this person can confirm this, their logic is sound. As in, if they only think that Des does something and they confirm it, their logic would imply that that's okay. I mean, it's a logical fallacy, but it still follows. It confirms their thing, right? Perhaps. I'm being a little argumentative. Technically, it's incorrect. I'm just saying it's incorrect. But they're talking about, so they said, well, I don't get it, or like, I don't understand you. And then they gave me an example, right? This is where des is, and when you say drop your grammar and stuff, I'll get to that too. So when you get to des, this person gave me an example, right? And it doesn't necessarily, I don't remember the actual example, but it was in kana. It was in Japanese. So what he did was, I remember the phrase being the comparison of des being present and not present. And that very specific example, it was true. Okay? I'm getting to it. So, before I'll tease something about what I read about it, okay? So, this particular example, I believe, just happens to be an I, so an E adjective. Okay? We're gonna put that on the shelf because this is not supposed to be comprehensive. But I already have developed a way to remember this myself. And maybe in the future, I'll get into the nitty-gritty. But functionally, this example happens to be an E adjective, as in an I adjective in English, right? It's using it, and it ends with the root, the modifier E, like the stem E, right? So technically, I agree with him. It's like, yeah, that's true. Like, I can't tell the difference in terms of this functionality. In this very specific case, yes, I agree with you. Des does function to make sentences polite. Okay? Okay? So by coincidence, hear me out. I agree with this person. Des just functions to make a sentence polite in this case. Like, all right, cool, excellent, right? But I didn't know this. I didn't know this before. Like, this is during the stream, so I didn't have an evening to look at this. It just coincidentally happens. Okay. All right, Hideyoshi. I'm gonna. Okay. Here's a comment, Hideyoshi. I'm just not going to read your comments and just not read those things because I have not covered those things yet. So I have not covered those things yet. Even in one evening, just 4 hours of research, I will know, I can already anticipate probably 4 of the 5 things you're going to say. And one of them is that. Whereas adjectives are predicates in Japanese. That's where we're heading here. So let's just say that in my highest respect for this person to try to help me or simplify things, basically, is that I agree with them. Like, in retrospect, this person is correct. Des functions just to make this particular sentence polite. I agree. So in retrospect, in full ignorance, I'm okay with this statement. So you'll probably be able to see that yesterday. However, this I continue to say, well, no, it doesn't make me only think of this. Like, it doesn't. I can think of other things, right? I don't think this is the case based on my observation. Based on my observation. And this is where your first comment came in about Duolingo, Hideyoshi, which is Duolingo. I have observed examples that Duolingo have given, unit 1 through now unit 8, right? I have observed other patterns. Through observation, there were other patterns, all right? Not explanations. I'm not looking for an explanation for these things yet because I'll wait on them. I do have great I feel I have fairly reasonable observational skills. So I noticed patterns that would suggest Des doesn't function just to make sentences polite. And I told this person that Duolingo, through my learning of Duolingo, there are more patterns that are unexplained, right? But you can still observe the patterns. They just don't have explanations. That would make me think Des does not function just this way, okay? It is accepted in a way that one of its functions is to make sentences polite, okay? One of its functions. So that person continues to press like, no, it just is. It's quite literally. And then we had a side conversation about, well, I'm not American because I don't use it like that, which was literally my point. He's using just literally, as in des only functions as a sentence thing. That is an Americanism. It's how you emphasize and project truth by implicating that that is the only truth. And in this case, there's observations that I've made without the knowledge of how des functions that contradicts this. So this person says, well, I'm not American, side note, and just so you know, using an Americanism doesn't make you an American automatically. That's a assumption. That's an implication. So they could say, are you implying I'm American? That's a fair bit, but instead they went with I'm not American, as in they're presuming that I'm assuming they're American by saying they're using Americanism. That's not how that works. There's no transitive identity when you adopt a behavior from a different culture. So clearly this person is not American, and it's kind of interesting because that also introduces a bias towards Americans. So we're really going to go deep diving for some alternative digression. They're also biased towards Americans because it almost sounds like it was repulsive. They were negating the idea that they can be associated with being American. And guess what? I speak English, American English. So I'm already having an uphill battle. And I was not really polite. I feel that upon reflection, I was quite aggressive here. So I told him immediately, like, you do know that logic is, it's flawed. When you use an Americanism, you can adopt it from anywhere, from the internet. So that person suggested, well, yeah, then I didn't use an Americanism. Like, well, you don't have to be American to use an Americanism. You use just like an American, where they're emphasizing that this is the only point. This is the only possible outcome. Des makes sentence polite. And I was insisting that this is a oversimplification. When you are really used to something and you develop habits, you become complacent and you oversimplify things. It's not to being helpful by simplifying things gives you quote unquote, oh, what the heck? Uh-oh. Why did that just go away? Oh, well, that's fine. That's fine. We'll just continue from where that was. So, in our discussion, I don't know why it erased. I think there's too much on the screen and this like plugin kind of breaks. But so, regardless, I still insisted that there's more to des. Because I can't, if des was, for example, if I were to accept this guy's hypothesis, and I'm calling it a hypothesis because this is how I do logic, and logic is something that was brought up just now. If I accept this guy's hypothesis, then I have to try to confirm the null, try to see if the null hypothesis it has any grounds or evidence. So the null hypothesis would happen to be my feelings. So if I accept his word as someone that's clearly more experienced than me in Japanese, perhaps more experienced than me because of the way they hold themselves. And this is where they mention, well, for a person who has studied Japanese for 21 days, they should know that des just makes sense as polite. That's the paraphrase. So they implied, I'm not sure here if they're implying like, I've done this for 21 days, so I should get this. Like, well, duh, you have to know this by now. Or they're saying, it's unclear, or they're saying, dude, my man, you've only done Japanese for 21 days. You shouldn't, like, I'm helping you because this helps people understand the Japanese language by oversimplifying it. Either way, I wasn't appreciating either of those approaches, right? Those are my two interpretations. So let's go on and assume this guy, I accept that des only functions in polite things. So this guy asks me, explain to me why you think des has more functions. Okay? Right? And my thought was, this is where I failed. I failed miserably because I couldn't explain it. Not only that, right on the docket, I wasn't able to give examples, like exact specific examples, where it made me think that no, there are other patterns that would suggest des has more function. The only thing I mentioned in this case was, can linguistic features of language A be expressed fully in language B? That's a deep question. Unfortunately, I'm in the middle of something right now. Maybe I'll think about that. I'm gonna say yes and no, or no, I'm just gonna say no. But it's a bigger, like, it's another hour thing later. But for now, it's gonna be another hour before I finish this. So I'm sorry, but it's a great question. What do you think? Can linguistics features of language A be expressed fully in language B? So my answer is no, but no is oversimplification. I don't want to give yes or no questions without explaining them, right? So for now, I don't want to digress. I don't want to derail this. So thank you for the ponderance question. So let's just say des functions, right? So what I gave the person is, when Duolingo doesn't explain the grammar yet, because it's in section 2, by the way, when they try to get a person to learn something immediately and then throw some things, you kind of notice patterns. At least myself, I notice enough patterns. So one pattern suggests that there's an association. This is what I mentioned. I dropped the word like pronoun or noun, right? There's an association with more so not so much the noun, but more so the subjects, the subject and the object. And both the subject and the object in the early units of Duolingo, they are classically focused on using subjects and objects in the form, which are in the form of a noun, right? And a lot of peculiarity came out with the idea of implicit nature of pronouns as well, for the subject, right? And then the object, they started with nouns like sushi, ocha, right? Like ocha desu, sushi desu. And then you had the introductions like Ken desu, Naomi desu, things like that, right? So at the core, yeah, Hideyoshi, I'm just gonna stop reading your things because you're really need to not make comments before I get to them. But thanks. I'm trying to be very respectful to your inclination to state something before I'm getting to it. It's kind of like a impatient person who always skips to the end. respectfully. So, pattern association. So, what does this tell me? Well, this is what I mentioned. There's some association with noun usage in Duolingo for the early examples. So, lots of your early vocabulary and early examples, and these units, by the way, are not focused even remotely on grammatic explainers. So that is not the intent of the design of unit 1. So do not criticize something about basics and explicits when they're not intended to do so. That is condescension, and that is disrespectful, in my opinion. And that's myopic. So let's place that clear. When there's something that's not intended to do something and you criticize it for it not doing it, well, that's being insensitive to the design, in my opinion. So let's just go ahead and say that. And then interrupting someone and superseding what they're about to say is the same insensitivity. Anyways, so at least this point, all I know so far is I can observe this. There's an association of subject and object with the presence of des that isn't necessarily involved in politeness. So if at all, this would support the null hypothesis, as in it will reject this person's hypothesis of politeness, right? So it's not just making sense is polite. No matter what this is, the observations do not specifically support this person's concept. And then this person pressed like, well, explain more. Like, give me an example and stuff. It's like, well, I can't. I'm still learning Japanese. It's kind of hard for me to do this. I didn't spend years or something to iron this. But what I can tell you is there is at least an association of the subject and object with the use of des. And I even said something like, because I see this pattern, I am mechanically operating on this pattern without any formal learning or explainer. So there has been no explainer. I have not looked for an explainer. I haven't even thought about sentence structure yet, because I embrace how Duolingo is trying to teach people in order to see what it actually does, not somebody's perception extending from observing someone. Okay, just as this is empirical observation versus implicit or inference. So much like your presumption about me, where Duolingo is possibly leading me down the wrong path of basic concepts, it actually led me to a more in-depth understanding of the concept because I observed what Duolingo did. So contrary. Okay, so that's an implicit inference you're making from observations, right? You're not actually literally doing the thing. And oftentimes commentary and advice is offered when you're implicitly inferring what's going on, as opposed to empirically being here to see the whole thing before actually making commentary. Okay, so what does this end me with? Well, this person basically just laughed and we never hear from them again. That's it. We just never hear from them again. This is where the conversation ends. So, what does this lead me? Well, that evening, right? That evening, which is actually yesterday, last night, I at least tried to educate myself, because for me, I was dissatisfied. I was dissatisfied with how I was unable to explain. So I was dissatisfied with my lack of just examples. Is largely my criticism of myself. I just lacked examples, and usually this is a great thing, because what this means is I have a learning opportunity. So here's where I'm not going to entertain anyone who wants to be technical. So this is not technical. What I'm about to say, it's not technical. Again, not comprehensive. It's a learning process. And I want to do a shout out because Indy is here, right? And this is what I mean by yesterday's wonderful question that Indy asked me, that I had an opportunity to answer again. Do I learn the wrong way to expect to correct it later? And that was the whole video, the digression about constructive versus destructive learning. So to correct it later. And I basically could not answer this directly. I actually learn a way to remember something and then change and add to the thing. So I don't ever think of something when someone throws in the word wrong, I can't empathize with you. So I learn a way, assess the observations, and then I add on to it. So I welcome people to add on to my knowledge, and then eventually whatever I end up with, it's the combination of everything. So I don't rest on a pattern. I don't rest on a specific concept. Much like I don't rest on the idea that Desu only has one function. In fact, the example I gave the person is a meta function. And let me qualify what a meta function is, because it involves in learning in addition. A meta function is, yes, we can talk about the literal correct use of Desu, right? But it doesn't help the meta function of remembering things. Often. For myself, I'm speaking for myself now. So oftentimes I create associations to initially remember stuff and practice stuff. And oftentimes people think, well, this leads to bad habits. And then that's fair enough. It may. I'm going to say it might or may lead to bad habits. I don't see these as bad habits. I see these as temporary stepping stones. And that's just my way of learning. Okay? So I develop temporary associations in order to facilitate remembering things when I can't remember them. So a lot of times they serve meta functions. And one of the meta functions of Desu is that it is associated with a subject and an object for the time being. That is the observation. And so I spend that evening trying to figure out, why am I getting this impression? Why am I getting the impression that is associated with subject and object? Operating on the hypothesis. My hypothesis, you might be surprised. My hypothesis is I'm wrong because I haven't learned enough yet. That is the most obvious hypothesis here, because Duolingo did not talk about grammar. So the hypothesis, the obvious hypothesis, is I'm probably inaccurate because I haven't actually learned any grammar. So the null hypothesis is, are my observations accurate though? are my operations accurate at least? Or like, is this at least something that I'm observing properly, right? Is something not wrong, basically, about my learning process? Is a subject and object anything associated with des? So I'm not offering a masterclass in Japanese or anything. I'm just confirming if there is something more than making a sentence polite. That is the whole goal. Not what it is, not everything it is. It's not comprehensive. So, long story short, I spent 4 to 5 hours digging for just des compartmentalized. So not even the whole scape of the whole structure. So what I can confirm is, yes, indeed, des has more functions. Okay? Fair enough. It's a blanketed statement. It's someone who only has 21 days. And we'll go into a little bit more just to illustrate how I concluded this. So I can explain it a little bit better from a limited learning potential here of 21 days. So there are situations where des is required because des can act as a copula verb, right? And sure enough, in the beginning, we have the noun plus copula verb combination. And des acts as the copula verb. So this is in an additional function. We're not going to go into the technicalities and stuff in the interest of time. And there was, in the beginning, there were also maybe one verb, like just standalone action verb. Implicitly, it's kind of very similar, but this is where des came in first. The noun, copula verb. Then there was examples. Some of the first adjectives happens to be E adjectives or I adjectives for the linguistic peeps who are talking to English people, right? The I adjectives, right? And I adjectives, the ones that were introduced in Duolingo, happens to be the ones that are also predicates on their own. And without going into what predicates are, especially using the English term predicates, because I know quite a lot about English grammar, we're just going to leave it at that. Predicates are, we're going to say, functionally the summation of the main verb and all its auxiliary modifications onto that predicate, that verb, right? We're just going to blanketly say that. It's good. It's much, much deeper. I guarantee you it is much, much deeper. However, I adjectives were the first in the Duolingo units. So it just so happens in this very situation, when it's we're not gonna introduce the whole like wa particle, but the equivalence. So when you have the subject and the object, if the object happens to be an I adjective, it is a predicate in its own. So in this function, if you add des, it follows logically for what that person said. It makes the phrase polite. But when a I adjective is at the end, it becomes a predicate. And a predicate has the assumption that it can act as a copula verb. Okay? Oh, hey, look, it's Mr. Day. It's day 8 guy. So, hi, day 8 guy. I was expecting day 18 guy, but there we go. Anyways, here we go. Let's keep going. Again, not technical, not comprehensive. We're trying to confirm that des functions elsewhere. So here we go. Confirmed everything I said about the day 8 guy, but let's keep going. So here we go. And so we know that des has more function, right? Because when you get into yesterday, I learned my first na adjective. By sheer coincidence, these are just observations. So I noticed that, wait a minute, And we talked about the Indy and I kind of talked about this, where there is he teased about the na particle, right? And which just happens to be relevant to the situation of the na adjective. So, however, when na adjectives are used, let's just say as the object, the predicate, right, or the predicate position, the object position, this requires a copular verb, which happens to be des. So again, this is a second function or a third function, however you're keeping track. It's just more than one. We just have to confirm it's more than one, right? We're all on the, at least on the same page. It's more than one, all right? And then there's more, right? Des is functioning as something that can be conjugated. And then here's the big scooper that led to this guy saying Duolingo sucks. And I agree with him in the sense that, or her, or whoever, I agree with him that it doesn't explain any of this. That's probably what the person's implying. So the person's implying when they say Duolingo sucks, which Hideyoshi has made pretty clear, that Duolingo sucks because they actually don't explain these things. Now the question is, in Unit 1, which is all I have right now, I'm actually not even at the end of, or Section 1, sorry. Section 1, right? It's not grammar. So what do I do when it's not grammar, as not intended? I'm looking for patterns. So here's the last pattern that I notice that would lead me to believe that des serves a different function, right? So, and again, these are called digressions, just because I saw a commentary and I'm not reading that comment yet. Digressions are not lectures. Lectures are formal, efficient, right? So when someone tries to summarize something, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for memory, learning, and empirical experience. So it's going to be long. And I've already prefaced by saying this was going to take at least an hour and 30 minutes without interruptions. Right? Anyways, so Duolingo sucks. Which probably, this person doesn't strike me as someone who uses Duolingo, because they probably already know the examples I'm talking about if they use Duolingo. So the implicitness is they don't explain anything. And I'm suggesting that it's not even intended. However, it doesn't stop me from seeing these patterns. So the last pattern, which Duolingo happens to encounter too, and it is a very specific use case. And they introduced a na adjective before the person even knows it's a na adjective, right? And they used it in the attributive form. I forgot which one I'm thinking of because I haven't even learned how to distinguish between them yet. We did get our first introduction into that. We even got the first introduction of the ga, like the ga object, right? So that's not even close yet. We're not even diving deep. It was actually kind of difficult for me to even understand these because we haven't gotten there yet. Slow, steady, stop running the pace. I don't want internet hustle culture. This is not about internet hustle culture. If it was, I would only post a 10-minute video with the most refined, concise formulation of the story and provide it as though it's trivial. This is not trivial to me. I really respect and need to give proper time to the people who spent their time commentating. So I'll get to that eventually. So non-adjective before the, sorry, not before the person. I meant before the object. So then the object, this would put the null adjective into the attributive form, right? The attributive form. And in those cases, I forgot. By coincidence. This is by coincidence. I forgot to add des. And these are incomplete sentences. Written. Because when the na is using the attributive form, it's not a predicate anymore. And that's also kind of true about e adjectives or I adjectives. However, I could think of some examples like oishi, I don't know. Oishi, ocha, right? And I accidentally, early on, I forgot I dropped the des, right? I dropped the des. As in, not drop it into a sentence, as in, I forgot it. And those aren't predicates. I adjectives and na adjectives in the attributive form is not considered a predicate. And at minimum, Japanese sentences require predicates. Not verbs, predicates, right? Because of the explicit nature of using an English term to describe that. So all this, in the end, even if I don't know, we're not going for accuracy here. We're not going for precision. This is not like comprehensive, okay? But before everyone just like starts swinging their like extra knowledge, right? And I'm welcoming that eventually. It is more. Des serves more functions than just making sentences polite. However, when that person presented their evidence and they had a narrative presented, it is logically sound. They presented a case where it confirms their confirms their hypothesis. Oops, I'm writing off to the edge. But they produced a case and situationally tried to provide advice for me in a simplified manner. Okay? And I know that there are a lot of people here that don't like simplification. They are very passionate about language here. And I've already seen a bunch of questions and explainers. Absolutely. Simplification is different from explaining something complicated but understandable. And to me, in retrospect, this person strikes to me as someone like me who is learning Japanese. And they're trying to find associations somewhere. And a lot of times, yes, that can lead to bad habits. And it's up to that person to decide if it's a bad habit or a stepping stone for learning. In contrast to what I see a lot of people assume about me, I'm not inexperienced. Okay? I'm not inexperienced in learning. I actually spend most of my time working on habit formation. And the first step to understanding how to manage habit formation is to stop using in my opinion, to stop using words like wrong, bad, and permanent. Or implying that it's permanent. Okay? So, for now, I have about a 4 to 5 hour data mine of consensus of trying to explain a Japanese concept, right? A Japanese concept using English as the facilitating language. All right? So English is the facilitating language. And much like what the earlier question from our new guest here, is that my effective answer is no, it can't comprehensively and explicitly introduce and summarize transferably. But it is a facilitating language, and we must use it in some way. Just like if I start talking Fujianese, there are very, very extraordinary things that I cannot explain now, but I can observe, and I can't explain them because I haven't learned how to express them. And even then, there's a limitation between a loss and translation. Fair enough, right? What you can do with a facilitating language is often see what is likely not the case and what is the case. And in this situation, it all stemmed from the beginning of the conversation with using the word just. Just implies to me a simplification. And I was just making a commentary on this type of phrase. And just so you know, right? Just so you know, as a lack of a better word, I'm not the biggest fan of simplification for complex topics. And much like all the people here who can't help but say it is more complex, I feel you. I absolutely feel you. But I'm not here to trying to explain how I feel or how others feel. I want to talk about the person I'm talking to. And I do feel hopefully that person enjoys Japanese and perhaps find out that Des has more functions. Will they or will they not is based on their mindset and motivation. In my opinion. Right. In my opinion. So, that person, it has a logically sound thing, which lulled me into agreeing with them. And I'm okay with that because in my scape, in my mindset, I'm not rushing to become a comprehensive person. I'm seeing where the logic is and where the observations tell me. It was just a disagreement because I observed other things in Duolingo that just doesn't fit there, but I couldn't explain it yet. That's why you learn. When you learn, you can learn to explain, and I can sort of explain things. But in the interest of time, because this is the internet and the hustle culture, most people will try to supersede me and explain it, and arguably also simplify it in a shorter amount, like say a paragraph of dialogue or something. That's fair to them, right? You would love to hear an example from Fujianese? Fujianese, chỉ đúng ngoài mẹ ni bon wa ma yang o yao just ni bon wa. I said that right now it's questionable if I know enough Japanese. A little Japanese. Niya ni bon wa. And you can probably hear that the adoption of Nihon, right? Nihon, Nibon. Nibon is the Fujianese, at least Fujianese way of saying Japan. So my parents always say Nibon, like Nibon nine. Nine is Jin. Nihon Jin, Nibon nine. So that's that's Fujianese. And I'm completely illiterate in Mandarin, by the way. That's the next language. I want to become more fluent in Mandarin. And that's not Mandarin, but Fujianese use the writing system, right? So I'm completely illiterate. This is my actual first language is Fujianese. Yeah. And is there an analogy of the use case of des? Unfortunately, I have no idea. I only talk in common tongue, so I don't think there's a syllable for des. So like Sibuno, Jirung Waigan Oko. Jirung Waigan Oko, there's no des in it. Or like there's no like thing at the end of a sentence or des position or something. It just says Jirung right now. Waigan Oko. Why me Gian Oko. As in I'm leaving. I'm leaving now. So I don't know if there's a polite way of saying, like, there's no like modifier that would make that polite. It's those are the literal words, like Wagano, that's it. There's nothing else. Yeah, I think Japanese has added that layer. You know, while it adopted some stuff as a basis, I love that Japanese culture added on top of that, in my opinion. So okay, so let's go over some of the stuff. Let's think. Does Duolingo offer easily accessible data sheets of practice from which we can infer its teaching structure? No. Yes, no, it does not. The closest thing I love right now about Duolingo is it provides a template. It provides a template. So again, it goes back to what Hideyoshi said. It's supplementary. And the thing about supplementary is I already talked about this too, where that word supplementary is a categorical tell of someone's value. So supplementary would imply optional, or it's secondary, or even less than secondary. That's the perception I have. To me, I think of Duolingo, in my opinion, think of Duolingo as a template. So it does a lot of templating. And when you're doing templating, you get something like iOS. Okay, iOS design. It's templating. So it acts on intuition with incredibly like we're gonna use the word basic core structure. So when you're looking for an easily accessible data sheet, even simpler than that, what they do is they do guidebooks, right? Guidebooks is a summary system, just like give you like the tips and catalog of some of the topics that were in a specific unit. It's incredibly simplified. And what it's trying, in my opinion, what you can take from a non-supplemental material, if you're using it as a learning basis, what I can see from this is, hey, it doesn't tell you you should make a guidebook. Think about how to make a guidebook. Here's a great example. Here are some key phrases. You should get a notebook and make key phrases of everything. What it's suggesting is it's creating a habit. It's creating a habit of doing a lot of things that work, but not in great detail. So, and then you have characters, right? So hiragana, right? Hiragana structured in this way. Hiragana is structured in this way. Katakana, right, is structured in this way. You should use this as a starting point, a template, because when you're thinking about a product that needs to be approachable and accessible, generally all the planning and all the detail work is made in a extremely what Hideyoshi would use as a supplemental approach, which is to enhance something core. If you're using the design, if you're actually studying Duolingo design, which Hideyoshi seems to imply that the person is interested in design, such is business. That's a phrase, in my opinion, demonstrating that you know something about design and business cues. I disagree with you just because of how easily dismissive you are about how Duolingo structure works. This is the start of what you what a person would use as a foundation of habits, but people don't learn the habits. They use the tool and don't use the skills that it's compensating for. So when you ask for, is this an easily accessible data sheet? Not particularly. It's not, and it will leave you wanting more. Generally, if you're passionate about Japanese, all this stuff won't be enough. And that is the design that's intended for Duolingo. It's enough to show you that you are interested. It's not enough to promote the learning skill sets that require you to acquire a language, right? So not only is it not supplementary, in my opinion, if you take Duolingo as a design program, like looking at the design choices, you will, in my opinion, learn a lot about the things you should expand on as a technique for learning. Not Japanese, learning, just specifically learning. And that's my original goal of using Duolingo. It is not to be a master of Japanese. It is to demonstrate how to understand what is intended design versus what you want to see in a product. There's a very huge difference between constructive data sets, like constructive criticism about a product in the context of what it's intended to do versus out of context. So destructive criticism is what I typically use the phrase for when things are taken out of context. You can't criticize someone if you don't know their intent. Just like offering advice. You offer advice knowing the intent of that person, not offering advice unsolicited. That can be both destructive. It could help, for sure. But a lot of times, it might even be confusing, counterproductive, and destructive. Or even discouraging, in fact. And Duolingo stays away from that. And that's part of some of the business design choices when it comes to app design. Not such as business, as in efficiency, being tarsh, being like, there's a motivation behind it. Much like Japanese, the use of the function des has a lot of intricate and nuanced uses, right? So does design. So when you go around trivializing people's hard work, are you expecting people to trivialize your understanding of Japanese? I mean, as far as I know, in the true spirit of Japanese, things are not that simple. And then kanji. Kanji has practice and stuff. So what I would insist is you create a data sheet, I suppose. That should be, in my opinion, as someone who probably strive to be a polyglot or a multilingual person, these strategies are already at part of your core. I already have data sheets and whatnot. So I'm coming into this expressing things that I bring to Duolingo as well while using it. So there are a lot of things I've already said that I do that's outside of Duolingo, but I stream Duolingo because it's streamable. And I like to use Duolingo as a platform to suggest other learning techniques. It's not about learning Japanese, it's about learning. I know that's kind of like saying des is not just making sentences polite. It serves other functions, and if it overlaps, it happens to seem like the same function. Learning to learn is different from learning Japanese. Sorry, but not sorry, really. This is where I enter the whole specialization specific things. Getting people to learn is not the same as learning in the context of Japanese. Getting to people learn in general is Duolingo's intent, not how accurate and how precise and how effortful they make towards any specific language. But yes, data sheets would be very valuable in deducing how it works. Absolutely, because I do those data sheets myself and it would really help. Like a web design, like a webbing, maybe a visualization. I generally use an approach where you take like A, right, B, C, maybe even Venn diagrams, right? We're taking an element here, like element like element na, element to, right? And then you do connections. Visualization helps, including different representations of data. Absolutely. That is a great addition. It also means that perhaps one can develop those skills. Because if it's provided, right? Say if datasheet is provided. This is generally what I mean by there is a trade-off. If a datasheet is provided, will users learn to make datasheets? We don't know. We don't know because they don't provide datasheets, like plus or minus datasheets. But an option would be great. What I mean is options are always great. Options, right? Add plus or minus datasheet. Do I want datasheet? Turn it on. Do I not want? Sure. Feature rich, right? Feature rich. Feature rich. Great. What does that mean? Money. Time. And people like such is business. Like Hideyoshi's comment. Well, one thing's for sure. You extract nearly 95% of Duolingo at $0. If you're in a hustle culture, right? If you're in a hustle culture, no, this is not $0. It's probably like $10 a month because, you know, that's their business model. So there you go. And let me read the rest of the comment because we're ending this digression. I spent an hour and a half, more or less, is what I wanted to keep it to. All right. So I see that perhaps my comment about my stick up my butt is pretty apt right now. Okay. Des is the polite language, sure. Copula, mostly equivalent to is in English in a sentence which makes sense more polite without having any other meaning. An example as the copula could, okay, fair enough. Des can also be used after yep and the negative plain form of verbs, in which case it only serves to make the sentence more polite. Fair enough. Yes, we cover that too. I saw you arguing with someone again in the carousel and couldn't help myself. Hopefully this settles my 30-minute long argument. Well, unfortunately, I'm not settling. So let's make a commentary. I'm not selling an argument because we were talking about different things. Notice in that actual video, I agreed with him. There wasn't an argument. There was an impasse of understanding. And what I mean by that is I couldn't explain properly what my point was. That was a failure. I couldn't explain what my point was concisely. Wow, that person actually made a point that was logically sound based on their sample size, right? And much like the comment you made about the argument, that is also sound from your perspective. However, since we're 1 hour and 30 minutes into this is exactly what I'm doing. This is exactly what I'm doing. And what did I do? I spent a whole evening trying to process it. And I will continue to hold that memory. And I will also continue to hold our discussion from day 8, right? About the stick. Arrogance. So these things, they're all tied together. Thanks for the commentary though. No, it doesn't settle. Technically, if I were to say how helpful that was, it wasn't, because I already spent an hour and a half It's probably been already an hour by the time you made that comment, and I was addressing this from yesterday. Instead of cursorily looking at a video, it went a lot longer than that actual video. And I wanted to pay as much respect to a person who was willing to actually understand me, at the same time oversimplified things, right? Because I couldn't explain it. So that was actually my failure here. I just had this feeling like, I don't think that makes sense, or like it didn't click with me very well, and I wasn't able to do that. So no, I didn't settle the argument because I didn't feel like we had an argument. We had two different points. My point was inclusive of that person's point. As in, I agree one of the functions of Des is making the polite speech, right? Which you pointed out yourself. And then there are very much situations where Des has other functions. And I am aware of a great deal of those functions. I decided to read, just as a credits off to this person, I decided to read excerpts from 80/20 Japanese. And what I mean is the 80/20 Japanese book, just for this very section on Des. So, take it for what it's worth. I tried to read, and guess what? This is still not on the Duolingo agenda. I mean, I learn as I see it. I don't jump ahead if I don't need to. Learning is a lifelong skill. As fast as you want me to go, as accurately as you want me to go, the journey is the richest part. If you want to speed ahead and go to the end, by all means do so, right? So it's funny because when someone put a time on something, the 30-minute argument, this isn't going to be a 30-minute argument. It's a memory for a lifetime. So it doesn't stop at 30 minutes. Just like most of these comments. Dropping to say hi. Also, you've known a na adjective for a while. Yeah, exactly. I technically knew a na adjective for a while. Yes, Lotus. Thanks for saying hi. I don't know if you're still here, but yes, I did find that out yesterday after evening. That's why I said like, yeah, and I didn't get to it yet. By the time you made that comment, you were probably making that comment when I was still at the noun and copula verb and the I adjectives. And sounds great. Is there okay? I wouldn't think so. Japanese is totally a different language family. Yeah, we only think of it being close because of the loan numbers. Yeah, the loan words, the number of loan words. Sorry. Sure wish the grammar points were on the side rather than achievement and gems. Fair enough. Such is business. For now, agree to disagree. We'll talk about structure, motivation, which one's more important. Having motivation, positive feedback of progress versus being constantly reminded on the front screen about all the things you have to learn, right? So there's an art to it. So perhaps not. It's a really big another session about prioritizing motivation over comprehension. ZF talked about economy of languages. Languages resort to abbreviation, other shorter forms of expression. Perhaps it is universal that politeness means resistant to economy by adding words, syllables, suffixes, and honorifics, and so on. Absolutely. Giz, if you are still here, Giz, we actually talked about this quite a bit. When someone said in day 3, someone said like, oh yeah, gozaimasu. They were talking about ultra politeness. I forgot who mentioned about ultra politeness versus business politeness, casual, like different variances of politeness. And someone suggested to me like, That's something that doesn't exist in English. And I would say, hold on to your hats. This is a fun little digression. I think it was, or a fun little nod back to, I think it was between day 4 and 5. This is before I met a lot of you guys, actually. And I really appreciate your presence on adding. Day 3 to 5, as in like within the first week, someone wanted to introduce and talk about Desu because it had something to do with politeness. And I knew this already because I watch anime and stuff, but this is the like surface level, like just the first thing. And I understand from even in day 21 yesterday why this is the case, psychologically, sociologically as well. So day 3 to 5, someone mentioned like, oh yeah, you know, there's not this in English. And I would say, I told them yes and no. No, yes, I agree, literally. But no, figuratively. And we had a super fun, candid trip down this lane where I told people how I switch voices in English. So, if you wanted to be someone who really elevate your English game, right? A lot of times you do notice certain patterns. And when it comes to politeness, you hit the nail on the coffin. It deals with economy. Economy is such a great way. And I actually did not think of using the word. I didn't actually use the word economy. I used the word tarsh and verbose. Being tarsh and verbose, like being concise and precise in English often comes up as aggressive, direct, and potentially less pleasant, right? And then when you become more agreeable and polite, it's often this purveyor of investing in economy. When you invest more economy, it feels like there is more effort and more consideration, more compassion in the talk. So when someone is trying to be, if someone paraphrased, for example, my 1 hour discussion into 10 minutes, this feels casual. This feels formal. Okay? And it's all relative, right? If the starting baseline is 1 minute for you, then 10 minutes would feel unnecessarily formal or something like that. But when you think of politeness, if you increase the economy of your phrases in English, that is mirroring the increased verboseness of Japanese. And that's a feature that is captured in English, in my opinion. Not necessarily the literal words, but the figurative feeling of it. So how I'm speaking right now, I'm using words, considerations, specific logic, and it takes a really long time to get to my point. But the idea is it becomes more formal, and if you are trying to be polite to someone, you generally extend your descriptor language in English. For example, we made a joke. Someone said like, may I have a pizza? May I request a pizza from your shop, please? Versus pizza now. Like, yeah, I like a pizza right now. And even adding right now is more descriptive than just I want a pizza. May I have a pizza at your convenience? May I request a pizza? Or if you happen to have pizza, may I order one? Like, as the economy expands in English, it often comes off as more formal and polite. There's no literal modifier or particle or any element that would insist that it becomes more polite. However, when you talk to someone and you listen to someone as a native English speaker, you will notice that certain people who sound very agreeable tend to be incredibly explicit and descriptive in a engaging way that even its length is pulled out, but you don't mind listening to them. As opposed to someone who sounds rough, unrefined, and short on words. So I've said in the over 9 minutes of time, I practically went over the same couple topics multiple ways without sounding redundant. And that is an element of trying to engage someone while reiterating something. Instead of being pedantic, rudely pedantic. It's still pedantic, but rudely pedantic. Like my yesterday's conflicted emotional response was that this person kept telling me, Des just makes sentences polite. Des just makes sentence polite. I don't get you. Des just makes sentence polite. That iteration without greater economy and investment comes off as rude and potentially very condescending. So would you want a teacher, for example, as someone who's trying to convince someone to consider new ideas? You find 3 or 4 alternative ways to present the same point. That is exponentially more polite than someone saying, get good. Did you get good yet? Hey, did you get good? Just get good. It's that easy. Get good. Just get good. Learn harder. Try harder. Keep trying harder. That's impolite. That's rude. That's an iteration, short on words, not adding to the economy of your explainers. And that is the closest, in my opinion, surrogate to English, to the point where I immediately added that point when someone says, oh yeah, you know, English does not have a equivalent figurative feel of being polite. Well, here's the slight deep cut, right? If you don't feel that way, it probably means one of the big likelihood is you work in a professional background that doesn't require you to be as eloquent as you may feel. And oftentimes those people who push back on me are those who are in a field where they get to express whatever their opinions are, throw out professionalism or the need for professionalism. If I have a stick up my butt, then it's my problem, not yours, right? Like, this person's the jerk, not me. So you don't need to practice those skills in English. If you run your own business and you're incredibly successful, you might not need the elegance of synonymous speech or changing your speech pattern and getting more quiet and then getting a lot louder. All these things are nuances of English that I say, once again, back to day 18 guy, the Mr. Linguist guy, the baseline of acceptable English is far lower than the baseline acceptable competency of Japanese. The reason why people are very aggressive against each other, even people who learn Japanese as a second language, is because rules, dictation, those things are very baseline heavy. So when someone says, oh yeah, Duolingo leads you into a wrong path of basic concepts with Japanese, I agree. I absolutely agree. Because the baseline of Japanese is so much higher. That's why when you say basic concepts, it's not the same for me. The basic concepts of Japanese might be a lot higher, and wrong paths can happen. I just don't approach Japanese in the same way that you do. I'm not, unfortunately, no disrespect, of course. I prefer the English learning flexibility, molding it into the Japanese perspective. So like, I'm taking the elements that I find very agreeable about the Japanese language and I'm adding it to my learning collection. So whether that is learning the wrong way only to correct it later, That's subjective. And to quote one of my favorite influencers, who is a very well-written author, no bias intended, who is a great YouTube respected person of intellectual standing. Language serves as a secondary capture. It is categorically going to be less expressive than the whole thing. So any language will lack and trade off in something that isn't the whole picture. So while English might lack something, it has something. While Japanese has something, it will lack something. And there will be a loss in translation, right? And in order to really truly delve into and live in them is to be able to live both languages. Well, unfortunately, life, we are linear time creatures. So based on our acquisition, we can't unlearn experiences. You can try really hard. And I talked about this yesterday about constructive versus destructive learning. If you're spending most of your time trying to unlearn habits that make you who you are, by all means, go ahead. I generally don't. When I see a habit that didn't have the desired pragmatic application, I try to apply that habit and mold it into something that is applicable now. I don't see my English habits as bad for Japanese. I see it as something I could change to make it more appropriate and add on to learn Japanese. I don't like, in my opinion, personally, I don't like throwing away things that I know in order to be better at something that is after. I like to meld them together. I'm a multicultural person. I talk about multiculturalism all the time. It's not in the spirit of Japanese. It's definitely not in the spirit of people who compartmentalize. So if you compartmentalize and say Japanese is not the same as English, fair enough. I absolutely agree. Japanese is not the same as English. What do I think about it? I associate English with Japanese because they are both part of me. So instead of saying one is bad, one is good, one's better at this, one is not, when I know that English can't do this, I know Japanese can do this. When I know Japanese can't do this, I know English can do this. Knowing what Japanese can and cannot do reminds me of what English cannot and cannot do. That is the richness of learning cumulatively, not destructively. When you tell yourself, oh yeah, I don't need Romaji anymore because I want to abandon the crutch that is the romance character for Japanese, I want to know both. The answer is both. If I can't do both really well, that's fine. I want to know both. It's all of the above. It's not one or the other. Does Des only serve one function? Well, if it doesn't, that's fine. If it only serves one function, that's fine too. My world is only as big as I make it, right? And this person's world apparently is a world where Des only makes sense as polite. Does it make you angry? Does it upset you? Does it prevent you from emotionally? That's up to you. It doesn't affect me emotionally. It does allow me, though, to talk about these things. And it's my favorite part about talking about these things. It's applying mindset and motivating your one sub to come to terms with the idea that I just don't know a lot of things. But I sure as heck find it super fun to try to learn about those things, even if I'm not going to be a master of them. And that's learning to learn, not learning to master a skill. Data sheets would be valuable. This is not related to competition, but this is the kanji I'm learning now. What the? I don't know if Lotus is still here, but oh man. What is that? What is that kind? Another nice feature would be providing a corpus tool. Yeah, that you can observe many uses of Des. That's true. That's true. I think I like sentence diagramming. So another great feature that they could add in the future is universally using a trying to like create the Duolingo version perhaps of modifiable or like structural diagramming. I talked about English sentence diagramming before, and how I came with all those patterns was me applying the English sentence diagramming and then modifying it to adjust to the Japanese sentence diagramming. So that was the only coincidentally, because of that, when I was reading about the grammar yesterday on Desu, it helped me orient my tentative sentence diagram structure that I was visualizing in my head, and I was easily able to orient it so that I could see where the Desu was coming from. I don't know that that was what modern linguistic people do. I just know that it helps me organize the information. So I actually have some preliminary stuff that I do that I doodle around all the time. So I use arrows and connections all the time, but that's what visualize in my head most of the time. So things can be slower, but I'm not aiming to be the fastest speaker in the world or in anything. I don't think fluency involves specifically how fast and how second nature things are. Controversial hot take, I suppose. But that's just me from a learning perspective. So I apologize for those who believe that that is the whole point of being fluent in a language. Fair enough. I can't speak English very quickly anymore. In fact, I actually, when I was a little kid, when I was younger, I used to speak and muddle a lot, like so rapidly that my language and articulation was not very great. I've met a lot of brilliant people in my life, and they speak so fast that it's almost unintelligible when they were young. And over time, I'm sure now if I meet them again, their speech pattern probably has slowed down intentionally to be a little bit more dynamic, right? So my English speech pattern is inherently, I would say, 15 to 20% slower than someone who would otherwise be an incredibly skilled and intellectual person, in my opinion. So naturally, when you're watching a YouTube video, most of my digressions are probably 20 to 30% longer than someone who would get done with saying all the things I've said in the same amount of time. That's a behavioralism that I'm willing to take. I slow down quite a lot. I pause a lot instead of trying to fill in the sound. Okay, the segments have patterns. Okay, Lotus making... Nobody ever uses the kanji for kirei? That's annoying. Oh my gosh, what the heck? It just looks like a block of... it just looks like a block of white color from my text size. I don't think politeness is always the sacrifice of economy in every culture. Don't quote me on this. We're not saying every culture. I literally only talked about English and Japanese. So, infer away. I legitimately just said English and Japanese. So, it's another presumption. It's an inference that you're making about what I'm saying. But in this case, I'm literally just talking about English. And in the United States, by the way. English in the United States. Sorry, American English in the United States. As someone who uses Americanized English in the United States. Not English in a different country as well. So the other potential reference to what Hideyoshi is saying is other people in other countries using English, that could be also an argument. He might not, like, Hideyoshi might not be referring to that, but that's a meta argument too. That could happen, where it's more polite to be harsh and concise in English in, like, I don't know, Italy or something. Generally speaking though, to be polite, you have to use more English words. To be polite and to be more concise and not to lead to misunderstandings, English is a descriptor language. It requires more words to be precise. When you continue to use pronouns, this, that, these, those, the passive voice, ambiguity sets in. And ambiguity relies on meta understanding that goes beyond the language at the moment, because English, when it becomes abbreviated, it takes on a lot of weight, and those weight leads to misunderstanding. And being polite often you want to reduce the chance of misunderstanding, in my opinion. In my native language, Turkish, in a Aglu native language, you add syllables and syllables to words if you want to be more polite. Oh, that's cool. From the discourse perspective, you still be aggressive or hostile even when being polite. Oh, okay. That's pretty neat. I could see some language isolate where politeness is gauged by how little of the other. Yeah. Again, I could too, Hideyoshi. I could too. I was talking again about American English, and presumably I wasn't being specific enough, but I am an American. I'm from the northeast side of the United States. So my educational background comes from the university standards of the United States. So oftentimes when you go to a lecture by a person like in the scientific field or an expert field, they attempt to be as explicit as possible. And that often comes off as more formal, or in this case, formal and potentially polite, because they're trying to remove the necessity for the other person to try to secondhand guess and misunderstand you. The consistency goes up as the volume of the words. You can also become more efficient as well. As the volume balloons, there's going to be a diminished return, right? There's a bell curve. It can go too long, and becoming more efficient requires that you learn more less used words to be more concise. And then the alternative is to abbreviate and weigh and contract words in order to fill in more words. So the volume itself is still consistently larger while compressing. So we already talked about the parallels between compressing a language using kanji versus compressing a language using contractions and abbreviations in English. And that actually does lead to casualness, because casualness implies that you're always on the same page. So when I say TBH, just literally say TBH. I honestly prefer to say to be honest. In the matter of fact, I don't usually use weighty phrases like to be honest anymore, because the overuse and iteration of such a phrase becomes casual, because it can be mean anything now. So the precision of a casual word loses its, like, it's a wild west to understanding the sentiments in the phrase to be honest now in online, in the English language, right? Like, to be honest, what is that inferring? That you're not honest most of the time? Or you're being honest despite the fact that someone might find it disagreeable? Are you excusing yourself for saying something? Are you going to subvert my expectations by saying to be honest? Are you priming me for some bad news or good news? Are you being helpful or being aggressively not helpful? Or candid, perhaps? It's casual speak. It comes off as confusing. Formal politeness, the lead to formal and politeness is to always assure the person you're talking to is on the same page. And in English, you require more words most of the time. And it's not just single phrases. When we're talking about English, we're talking about paragraphical phrases, like paragraphs of sentences. Because a lot of times you require more than one sentence even to sound polite. And the elegance of Japanese is that they've compressed this, and that's fantastic. You can even be saying something rude politely. That's kind of efficient, and I like it. I like Japanese take on it. And I'm not going to say that that is represented in English literally. It isn't. It really isn't. Figuratively, there are ways to do that in English that isn't literally the way Japanese do. That's all I'm saying. So it's kind of one of those things, like when you focus on what there isn't, that doesn't mean you can't get that tool to do something similar. Not literal. The more you think about it literally, in my opinion, you get to that same mindset where that guy is telling me, this is the truth, the one truth, and nothing but the truth, says the non-American. It's not just this. Learning involves problem solving and creating new things. I'm not trying, and just to end this whole segment again, because it is worth iterating, I am not trying to be Japanese. I'm trying to be an English speaker who has a background in a heritage in Chinese, trying to appreciate Japanese in that perspective. I believe my perspective is somewhat unique because I preserve my identity, much like Japanese people want to preserve their language and their identity. My identity is from the cultural richness of being a mix of cultures, not purity and compartmentalization. So, will I make errors like a gaijin? Yes, absolutely. Will a Japanese person possibly be offended by it? You know, if I was doing an Asianese perspective, I would tell them, I'm sorry, I'm from the United States. Hear me out. And you know what their mindset would be? All right, I'm ready for you. I see that you're a foreigner, and now I'm ready. Mindset works. Mindset bridges gaps. When you're in the same mindset, it's inexplicable in language. When you're just on the same wavelength, even though you have a language barrier, it's inexplicable. It's something language cannot capture. So, take it for what is worth. Investigating a language as a lens to their culture can breathe even more than literally learning if Desu functions somewhere. I cannot read Mandarin, but I can express a full range of emotions in a language that I can't even read to my parents. That is the element and limitation of actual language. So, language is still a facsimile to try to capture as much as you can, being in person with a human being, sharing experiences. There are things that just aren't even captured in languages. And much like this adventure, it's not a bad feeling. I don't feel bad about any of these things. I actually think it's so wonderful that there are people who differ in opinions, you know, people who think I'm arrogant. If there were no people that think I'm arrogant, how would I know that I'm arrogant? By myself? Less likely. So when people challenges me, that's great. If you walk away and don't feel challenged, then, well, you just don't learn anything. That's fair enough. You chose not to learn. I generally walk towards it in as politely as I can. And how do I show that I'm trying to put effort into this? Well, I spent 2 hours talking about it. If it's not worth your time, then that's fine. That happened to me when I was learning something else, like OS, playing the rhythm game OS, when someone said, wow, I'm not going to sit here and watch you 6 hours explaining a topic that I can explain in 10 minutes. Well, we are clearly two different people. When you say, like you said, Hideyoshi, you could see some languages isolated with politeness is gauged by how little the other person spends their time to not waste in conversations. Fair enough. That's assuming that the person thinks everything they say is a waste of time. So many people have come to me and said, or like enough people have come to me and like, yeah, what you say doesn't matter. Or you're making a big deal of something that it isn't a big deal. So yes, it would be a waste of time to them because they come from a culture that you cut to the business. What is my business? My business is to illustrate things that to me take a really long time. Every single minute of this, I'm not going to cut out. because it's effectively part of the whole point. If you're asking me for advice, I'm not giving you 10 seconds of my time. I'm not giving you 5 minutes of my time. You're going to have to give me a day at least. Spend over 10 hours looking into the thing. I'll give you a response, and it's going to be a long one. And I'm going to do my best in the command of my native language to keep you engaged. Not sound like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, or, keep your daily quest in mind. Keep your league in mind. Just as a precursor to what I'm saying about what's the difference between having motivators on the front screen versus what you need to learn. If you give someone who's already struggling with Japanese motivators to see, they are more likely to get their foot consistently through the door than someone who are always blasted by the overwhelming volume of Japanese. One of the biggest obstacles, arguably, in my opinion, that strays away from the way English learns is the inherent volume that is perceived about Japanese. What does Duolingo do in this case in terms of its design language, right? What do they typically do, knowing that they are an English company, and when other people learn other languages, it might be the English language that they're using as a facilitator. They do this. Does this look more overwhelming than an entire data sheet filled with all the breakdowns of the lessons? Because if you click on these lessons, it's still really not that descriptive. But at least before you click on this lesson, they'll tell you how many lessons are in each block. Some people might not even notice that the units per lesson actually goes up. As the units go up, the number of lessons per section goes up. So all these designs, in my opinion, are psychologically forward. And it's usually not because they did research on this, possibly some research on this. What I mean is, I don't think they innovated this technique because they're adopting what makes designs in gaming motivational versus comprehensive. And Duolingo is attempting to integrate that motivation into something that improves comprehension, as opposed to video games, which are mechanical a lot of times. People treat them, or kids, the targeted age group, treat them as mechanical. This is something that I've talked about before. And there you go. And we're about to start the lesson. We went over 2 hours, but I absolutely appreciate all the comments. And I would love to hear, record yourself. Explain your concepts and your perspective to me. It'd be really fun. It'd be really fun to hear the opportunity. Obviously, this is what I do, not even for fun. I actually think if I am able to, I want to do this professionally. Perhaps in the next year or two. And not learning language. I'm talking about creating things to give people alternative ways to overcome their learning, like augment or supplement, I guess I'll use the word, supplement their learning strategy. Oftentimes when you iterate and constantly iterate without maybe noticeable changes in your learning approaches, it might stagnate. So for me, learning using Duolingo is just providing other core foundations and templates that I may or may not have used anymore. Like guidebooks, that guidebook technique, I still use that coincidentally. But there is a chance if I use a different product and they had another feature that wasn't well developed, well, it's better than me not doing it before. Like I might have forgotten lots of techniques, like flashcards. I really haven't used flashcards that much since my younger days. My flashcards are now in my head. So I create mental flashcards in my place, in my mind palace place. However, it would be kind of fun to go grab a stack of index cards and then start writing down again. It's reminding me of foundations and whatnot. So yes, it might not be the perfect thing, Some people actually come out and say Duolingo is for kids, like, because cartoons are for kids and these animations are cute, so only cute things are for kids. And you know, look at all these bubbles and minimalistic design, that's for kids. You have tons of those. Small universe, fair enough. Like, I'm okay with that. Don't use Duolingo. I can't convince someone who already made up their mind. I can provide my commentary on how to do things, not just with the tool, but do more with the tool. I don't think I've ever really done a thing where I expected the system to provide everything. I do feel constructive criticism comes from that perspective in this day and age, in the day of technology, in the age of technology and the hustle culture. You're looking for the best tool and you hope that you don't have to do it yourself. And that's fair enough. I approach Duolingo knowing that if I can see what it doesn't do, I'll do it myself. And even the things that Duolingo shows and kind of does, I built on that. It is not supplementary. It is foundational. The difference between thinking things are foundational versus supplementary provides it that it's optional. It can be supplanted and substituted by something else. It's extra. Foundational means you're learning with wide eyes open. You're observing as much as you can, and you take those ideas, and that's not where you stop. You go beyond it. Duolingo is a foundational app. Not only is it foundational, it has a foundational price. And the price is 0. You cannot place that on other supplementary things. Supplementary is also 0. So it gives you that same emotional impression that Duolingo is supplementary because it's 0. I talked about the motivations and the psychological mindset of having to obligate yourself to get in value by like buying a subscription to LingQ. That was in yesterday's discussion, versus something that's 0. You have no obligations. So what you psychologically do is you diminish the value to meet the value of the product. Duolingo is free, so it doesn't do anything well because it's free. And then the moment you see like monetization, you're like, well, now Duolingo is expensive. It's free. If you want to give me a discussion about logical fallacies, that is a great logical fallacy. So if you want to go down that trip about logical fallacies and irrationality regarding framework and relatives, because someone mentioned the phrase, it's all relative, this would be a great example of logical fallacies. So before you criticize something, know that the baseline of Duolingo is $0. What does that make it? A foundational app. It's somewhere you can start with no consequences. And the sky's the limit. Just like English has a lower baseline than Japanese comprehension. English's ceiling, hot take, because there are more users, more different users, and variant users, and varying cultures, English has a high ceiling. Arguably a higher ceiling. Because you're gonna say, it depends. A lot. In Japanese, you're gonna say, this is the right way. This is the wrong way. Alright, with that, I'm gonna start my lesson and stuff, my own lesson today and learn some stuff, but I gotta go to the bathroom first. Be right back.